The airport buzzed with life. Families huddled near their gates. Business people rushed past in tailored suits, and the occasional child's laughter echoed faintly through the cavernous terminal. Amelia Hayes stood near the first-class check-in counter, a picture of poise in her flowing silk blouse and tailored slacks. Her caramel-toned skin gleamed under the soft lighting, and her braided hair, neatly tied back, framed her serene expression. She adjusted her leather handbag and smiled faintly, anticipating a smooth journey to the conference where she was scheduled to speak. The line moved forward, and Amelia approached the counter. The woman behind the desk, a blonde with sharp features, glanced up briefly, her eyes narrowing as they scanned Amelia's face. Amelia extended her boarding pass with a polite smile. "Good afternoon. I have an upgrade to first class on Flight 217 to Denver," she said, her tone warm but firm. The woman's eyes flicked to the boarding pass and lingered for a moment too long. Then, with exaggerated slowness, she swiped the ticket through the scanner. A small beep followed, indicating everything was in order, but the woman's expression didn't soften. She muttered, tapping at her keyboard. Amelia waited, her fingers tightening slightly on the counter edge. Something about the woman's demeanor felt off. After a few moments, the woman looked up, her lips pressed into a tight line. "It seems there's an issue with your upgrade. This seat isn't available anymore." Amelia frowned. "That's strange. I confirmed the upgrade just yesterday, and I have the receipt here." She reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper, placing it on the counter. The woman didn't bother looking at it. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice lowering to an icy whisper. "Look, I don't know how you managed to get this ticket, but first class is full. You'll need to go back to economy." The words hung in the air like an open wound. Amelia felt her stomach tighten, but she didn't waver. She straightened her back and met the woman's gaze. "I don't believe that's accurate. Please check again." A smirk tugged at the woman's lips as she leaned back, crossing her arms. "There's nothing to check. Do you want me to call security?" The remark sliced through the space between them, drawing curious glances from the passengers milling nearby. Amelia's cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from anger. Yet she held her composure. Years of experience had taught her to remain calm under pressure, even when faced with blatant hostility. "Call security if you must," Amelia said evenly. "But I'd prefer you escalate this to someone who can resolve the issue without unnecessary drama." The woman's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She turned and motioned to a colleague, a tall man with a balding head and a clipboard clutched to his chest. After a brief whispered exchange, the man approached Amelia with a clipped, businesslike stride. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice tinged with impatience. Amelia explained the situation, maintaining her calm demeanor while the woman behind the counter folded her arms and watched with thinly veiled amusement. The man glanced between Amelia and the boarding pass before shaking his head. "Ma'am, this upgrade isn't valid anymore. I suggest you take your seat in economy." Amelia's fingers tightened around the boarding pass. Her voice dropped to a measured tone, each word deliberate. "I have a confirmed receipt, and this situation is beginning to feel discriminatory. Please escalate this to someone higher up." The man scoffed, his face twisting into a sneer. "Let me make this clear. You're not sitting in first class. End of discussion." A murmur rippled through the surrounding passengers, some craning their necks to watch the scene unfold. Amelia stood still, her heartbeat steady despite the heat rising in her chest. She glanced at her watch and then at the gate agent and her supervisor. This was no misunderstanding. This was something deeper. Reaching into her bag, she retrieved her phone. "If you're unwilling to handle this professionally, I'll have to make a call." The man chuckled, a dry, mocking sound. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want." Amelia stepped to the side, her fingers dialing a familiar number. She pressed the phone to her ear, her voice calm yet firm. "Eleanor, it's Amelia. I'm at the airport, and there's been an incident." The onlookers whispered louder, their curiosity piqued as Amelia turned her back to the gate agents. Her words were measured and brief, but her tone carried a gravity that silenced any doubts. When she hung up, Amelia turned back to the staff, her expression resolute. "You'll want to stay close. Help is on the way." The smirk that had lingered on the gate agent's face faltered. For the first time, unease flickered in her eyes. Amelia returned to her place at the counter, standing tall and waiting. As the minutes ticked by, she knew justice would come, and when it did, it would not be quiet. The air at the gate grew heavier, charged with a mix of curiosity and tension. Amelia stood rooted in place, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the counter. Her calm demeanor only magnified the unease creeping over the staff. Nearby passengers exchanged murmurs, their glances flicking between Amelia and the gate agents, unsure of how this unfolding drama might end. The blonde gate agent shifted her weight from one foot to the other, attempting to mask her discomfort with an air of indifference. She glanced at her watch and then at Amelia, the smirk on her lips a touch more brittle than before. The supervisor, no longer smirking, paced a few steps behind her, his clipboard clutched tightly to his chest like a shield. Amelia felt their stares, but she refused to let them unnerve her. Years of navigating spaces where she wasn't expected or welcomed had forged her resolve. She wasn't about to let these gatekeepers strip away her dignity. Not here, not now. Minutes passed, each one stretching into an eternity. Amelia heard the faint ding of an announcement overhead, the hum of distant conversations, and the rolling wheels of carry-ons as travelers moved past. Still, she remained poised, her stillness contrasting with the increasingly fidgety movements of the airline staff. Finally, a figure in a sleek gray suit appeared at the edge of the gate area, moving with a determined stride. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a low bun, and her sharp eyes swept over the scene with practiced precision. The crowd parted slightly as she approached, her expression neutral but alert. The blonde gate agent brightened slightly, mistaking the woman's arrival for a lifeline. "Good. You're here," she began, gesturing toward Amelia with an air of exasperation. "This passenger has been causing a scene." The woman in the suit raised a hand, silencing her mid-sentence. Her gaze landed on Amelia, assessing, before turning to the gate agent. "Let's start with what happened," she said, her tone clipped but professional. The gate agent hesitated, her confidence faltering. "Well, she claims to have a first-class upgrade, but the system shows no such thing. We've explained this to her, but she's being difficult." Amelia raised an eyebrow at the word difficult, but she held her tongue. The woman in the suit turned her sharp gaze back to Amelia. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass and any confirmation you have for the upgrade?" Amelia reached into her bag and produced the neatly folded paper. She handed it over without a word, watching as the woman unfolded it and studied it closely. The silence stretched as the woman cross-referenced the details on the ticket with the system on the gate's terminal. As she typed, her brow furrowed, the lines deepening with each passing second. Amelia noticed the faint flush of embarrassment creeping up the woman's neck. As she finally looked up, "It appears there was an error on our end," the woman said, her voice tight. She turned to the gate agent, her tone hardening. "This ticket is valid. The upgrade was processed correctly." The blonde gate agent's face went pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but the woman in the suit cut her off. "This situation should never have escalated to this point," she said sharply. "I'll handle things from here." Amelia could feel the weight of the unspoken apology in the woman's words, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She glanced at her watch again, timing things perfectly. "Thank you for verifying my ticket," Amelia said evenly, her voice carrying just enough edge to cut through the moment. "However, this isn't just about the ticket anymore. It's about how I was treated, how assumptions were made about me before anyone bothered to check the facts." The woman in the suit hesitated, clearly caught off guard. Before she could respond, Amelia's phone buzzed softly in her hand. She glanced at the screen, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "Excuse me," she said, stepping a few feet away to answer the call. The voice on the other end was firm and commanding. "Amelia, I'm 5 minutes out. Is everything under control?" "Yes, Eleanor," Amelia replied. "They verified the ticket, but the situation hasn't been addressed properly yet." "Understood," Eleanor Vance said. "I'll be there shortly. Stay where you are." Amelia ended the call and returned to the counter, her calm composure intact. She noticed the faint tremor in the gate agent's hands as she avoided Amelia's gaze. The supervisor had stopped pacing, but his face was flushed, his confidence thoroughly deflated. The woman in the suit stepped forward again, her expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. If there's anything we can do to make this right." Before she could finish, the atmosphere shifted. The sound of measured footsteps approached, growing louder. Heads turned as a new figure entered the gate area, a woman with an air of authority that commanded attention. Eleanor Vance, the governor, was not a tall woman, but she carried herself with the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. Her tailored navy suit was immaculate, and her expression was a mix of calm and steely determination. The gate agent visibly recoiled, her mouth falling open in shock. The supervisor's clipboard slipped from his hands and clattered to the floor. Even the woman in the suit seemed to shrink slightly under the governor's piercing gaze. "Amelia," Eleanor said warmly, ignoring the stunned silence around her. "Are you all right?" "I am now," Amelia replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Eleanor turned to the airline staff, her expression hardening. "I believe we need to have a conversation about what happened here." The gate area fell into a tense silence, every eye on the unfolding confrontation. Amelia stood tall beside the governor, knowing that justice had arrived, and it was only the beginning. The air in the gate area was suffocatingly tense, every sound muffled by the weight of unspoken accountability. Eleanor Vance, the governor, stood at the center of the scene, her gaze sharpened enough to pierce through steel. Amelia felt the unyielding strength radiating from her longtime friend, a strength that made her presence both reassuring and commanding. The blonde gate agent's confidence had crumbled completely. Her fingers trembled as she fidgeted with a pen, unable to meet Eleanor's gaze. The supervisor's face was flushed, beads of sweat forming at his temples as he shifted awkwardly on his feet. The woman in the suit, who had initially attempted to salvage the situation, now stood to the side, her posture stiff with unease. Eleanor took a deep breath, surveying the scene. Her voice, calm yet resolute, cut through the oppressive silence. "I need someone to explain to me," she began, her tone steady but icy, "how a confirmed, valid ticket for a first-class seat was suddenly deemed invalid, and why my friend had to endure this level of humiliation to prove what should never have been in question." The gate agent stammered, her lips trembling as she tried to form a coherent response. I, it wasn't personal," she blurted, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a mistake in the system, and I." Eleanor raised a hand, silencing her. "Stop," she said firmly. "This is not the time for excuses. It's the time for accountability." The governor turned her gaze to the supervisor, who flinched as though her words carried physical weight. "And you?" she asked. "Did you review the evidence before siding with your staff? Did you take even a moment to consider the implications of your actions?" The man's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I thought." His voice trailed off, and he lowered his eyes, his clipboard forgotten on the ground. "You thought what?" Eleanor pressed, her voice rising slightly, carrying an edge of controlled anger. "That it was easier to dismiss her claims than to do your job properly? That you could intimidate her into silence because she wouldn't fight back?" Amelia watched silently, her hands folded in front of her. She could see the other passengers frozen in place, their curiosity tinged with discomfort. For once, the tables had turned. The whispers were no longer directed at her, but at the staff who had treated her so callously. Eleanor straightened her back, her voice ringing with authority. "This behavior is unacceptable on every level. It's unprofessional, unethical, and, let's not mince words here, discriminatory. You don't get to treat people differently based on the assumptions you make about them." The gate agent's cheeks burned bright red, and tears welled in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but Eleanor cut her off again. "Save your apologies for the airline's HR department. You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself there." Eleanor turned to Amelia, her expression softening. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Amelia nodded, though the knot in her chest had yet to fully unwind. "I'm fine now, thanks to you." "Good," Eleanor said, placing a hand briefly on Amelia's shoulder before stepping back to address the woman in the suit. "You seem like the only person here who has any authority. What's the airline's plan to make this right?" The woman shifted uncomfortably, but quickly regained her composure. "We will, of course, provide Miss Hayes with a complimentary first-class seat and ensure that she is treated with the respect she deserves for the remainder of her journey." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her expression unimpressed. "That's a start," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "but it's hardly enough. This isn't just about one ticket. It's about a culture that allows this kind of behavior to happen in the first place." The woman nodded quickly, sensing the gravity of the moment. "I'll ensure a full investigation is launched into this incident." and we'll review our policies and training programs to prevent anything like this from happening again. You'll do more than review, Eleanor said sharply. You'll overhaul, and I'll be following up personally to ensure those changes are implemented. The woman's nod was more hesitant this time, but she didn't argue. Amelia could see the wheels turning in her mind, calculating the cost of compliance versus resistance. She made the right choice by staying silent. Eleanor turned back to Amelia and gestured toward the boarding gate. Let's get you on that plane, she said warmly. Amelia nodded, her shoulders finally relaxing as they moved toward the jet bridge. The gate agent and supervisor stood rooted to the spot, their faces pale and eyes downcast, the weight of their actions pressing heavily on them. The crowd parted wordlessly as Amelia and Eleanor walked through, their expressions a mixture of awe and guilt. As Amelia settled into her seat, she couldn't help but notice the careful, almost nervous glances cast her way by the flight attendants. Their smiles seemed forced, their movements overly precise, as though they were trying to overcompensate for the earlier incident. She didn't mind their discomfort. It was an acknowledgement, however subtle, that they understood what had transpired. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself to sink into the luxurious seat. Yet the comfort it offered couldn't quite chase away the lingering sting of humiliation. Closing her eyes, she replayed the events in her mind, each moment sharp and vivid. When the flight attendant approached with a glass of champagne, Amelia opened her eyes but didn't reach for the drink. The attendant hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there anything else I can get for you, ma'am?" she asked, her tone measured, almost too polite. Amelia studied her for a moment. The young woman seemed genuinely apologetic, though she hadn't been involved in the debacle. Amelia offered a small, tight smile. "Water, please," she said softly. "Of course." The attendant disappeared quickly, as if relieved to have escaped without further rebuke. Amelia's gaze drifted to the window as the plane began its slow taxi to the runway. The distant glow of the terminal lights blurred against the darkening sky. Her reflection stared back at her, the lines of her face softened by the glass. She wondered, not for the first time, why dignity often felt like a battle she had to keep fighting, even in spaces she'd rightfully earned. It always seemed like someone was ready to question her right to be there. The plane lifted off smoothly, the engines humming steadily as it climbed higher into the evening sky. Amelia leaned back in her seat, her mind drifting. Her phone was still tucked in her bag, but the memory of Eleanor's words lingered. "You shouldn't have to fight this fight alone," the governor had said earlier, her voice firm. "People like them thrive on the assumption that you'll stay silent. But silence is their weapon, and your voice is your shield." Amelia had nodded at the time, grateful for Eleanor's unyielding support. Now, thousands of feet above the ground, those words settled differently. They felt heavier, more complex. It wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small, unwelcome, or less than. She'd fought for her dignity today, but how many others had walked away, too exhausted or too defeated to stand their ground? The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Amelia turned to see a man in a tailored uniform approaching her seat. His badge identified him as the cabin supervisor. He stopped a respectful distance away, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Hayes," he began, his voice steady but deferential. "I wanted to personally apologize for the incident you experienced at the gate. It was unacceptable, and I assure you that our airline is taking immediate steps to address the situation." Amelia studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, her tone measured. "But words only go so far. Change requires action." The man nodded, visibly chastened. "I completely agree, ma'am. We've already begun an internal review of our policies and procedures, and the individuals involved will be held accountable. If there's anything else we can do to make your journey more comfortable, please don't hesitate to let us know." She held his gaze for a moment longer before nodding. "I appreciate the effort," she said, her voice softer now. "But comfort isn't the issue. Respect is." The supervisor inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a lesson he just learned. "Understood," he said simply before stepping away. As the flight continued, Amelia allowed herself to relax slightly. The attendants moved quietly through the cabin, their presence unobtrusive. The hum of the engines became a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. She reached for her bag and pulled out a notebook, the leather cover smooth under her fingers. Opening it, she began to write, a habit she'd cultivated over the years to process moments like these. Her pen moved slowly across the page, each word deliberate. What happened today wasn't just about me. It was about a mindset, a culture that allows certain assumptions to persist unchecked. If I hadn't fought back, if I hadn't had the resources, the voice, or the support to demand justice, how easily would I have been dismissed? How many others have been? She paused, the pen hovering above the page. Outside the window, the stars sparkled against the inky black sky, their light steady and unyielding. Change doesn't come from comfort. It comes from discomfort, from making people confront what they'd rather ignore. Today was a small victory, but it's only the beginning. The fight isn't over, not for me and not for anyone else who's ever been told they don't belong. The words felt like a promise, both to herself and to anyone who might one day read them. Closing the notebook, she placed it carefully back in her bag. For the first time that evening, a faint sense of peace settled over her. As the plane began its descent into Denver, Amelia gazed out the window once more. The city lights sparkled like scattered jewels, a reminder of the world she was re-entering. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was hers to navigate, to challenge, and to change. When the wheels touched down, Amelia felt a renewed sense of purpose. This journey wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about carving out space where there had been none, about making sure no one else had to fight the same battles. And as she stepped off the plane, she knew one thing for certain. Her voice was stronger than ever. The air was crisp and sharp as Amelia stepped off the plane and into the Denver terminal. The hum of activity around her contrasted with the silence in her mind. She adjusted the strap of her handbag and took a slow, deep breath, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she made her way toward the baggage claim. The memory of the flight lingered in her thoughts, each moment replaying like a film she couldn't pause. The confrontation at the gate had been a moment of triumph, yes, but also a reminder of the long road ahead. The small victories could be fleeting if they didn't lead to lasting change. As she waited near the carousel, Amelia noticed a family nearby, a mother, father, and 2 children. The young boy, no older than 7, clung to his mother's hand, his wide eyes scanning the sea of people around them. The girl, perhaps 10, stood tall, her braids bouncing as she gestured animatedly about something that had happened on their flight. Amelia smiled faintly at the scene. The innocence of youth was something she often admired. Children had a way of seeing the world not for what it was, but for what it could be, unmarred by the prejudices and complexities that came with adulthood. Her attention shifted as a soft vibration in her bag alerted her to an incoming call. She retrieved her phone, glancing at the screen before answering. "Eleanor," she greeted, her tone warm but laced with exhaustion. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I wanted to check in," Eleanor replied, her voice calm but concerned. "How are you holding up?" Amelia hesitated, her eyes fixed on the carousel as bags began to tumble onto the conveyor belt. "I'm fine," she said finally. "Tired, but fine." "You're allowed to feel more than just fine, you know," Eleanor pressed gently. "What happened today wasn't just exhausting. It was dehumanizing, and you handled it with more grace than most people could have." Amelia allowed herself a soft chuckle. Grace or stubbornness? Sometimes I can't tell the difference. "Maybe both," Eleanor said with a hint of a smile in her voice. "Either way, I'm proud of you. But more than that, I'm angry for you. What those people did today was unacceptable." Amelia sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "It's not the first time, Eleanor. You know that. And it won't be the last." "No, but that doesn't mean we accept it," Eleanor said firmly. "It means we fight harder. And you don't have to fight alone." The carousel beeped, and Amelia spotted her luggage, a sleek black suitcase with a distinctive red tag. She moved forward, pulling it from the belt with ease. As she turned to leave, a young woman approached her hesitantly. She wore jeans and a plain hoodie, her face framed by a wild halo of curls. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I saw what happened at the gate earlier. I didn't know how to say anything at the time, but I just wanted to tell you. You inspired me." Amelia blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected encounter. "Inspired you?" she repeated, her voice gentle. The woman nodded quickly. "Yes, I've been in situations like that before, and I never know what to do. But seeing you stand up for yourself, so calm and strong, it gave me hope. So thank you." The words settled over Amelia like a warm blanket. She smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of pride. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "Sometimes it feels like standing up doesn't make a difference. But knowing it reached someone, that means everything." The woman nodded again, her eyes shining with emotion. "It does make a difference. Please don't stop." "I won't," Amelia promised, her voice steady. "Neither should you." By the time Amelia stepped outside, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in deep hues of purple and blue. A car waited at the curb, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver, a man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair, stepped out and greeted her with a nod. "Miss Hayes," he asked. "That's me," Amelia confirmed, handing him her suitcase. He placed it carefully in the trunk before opening the back door for her. As the car pulled away from the curb, Amelia gazed out the window, the lights of the city blurring into streaks of gold and white. The silence inside the car was soothing, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions she'd experienced over the past few hours. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was an email. She opened it, her eyes scanning the screen. It was from the airline's corporate office, a formal apology for the incident, assurances that an investigation was underway, and a promise to implement changes to prevent similar occurrences in the future. Amelia closed the email, her lips pressing into a thin line. Words on a screen were easy. Real change required action, and she intended to make sure they followed through. The car slowed to a stop in front of her hotel, a towering structure of glass and steel that gleamed under the city lights. The driver opened her door, and Amelia stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement as she made her way inside. The lobby was grand, with marble floors and towering columns. A soft murmur of conversation filled the space, but Amelia barely noticed. She was already thinking ahead, to the conference, to the speech she would give, to the broader fight for equity and justice. As she rode the elevator to her room, she felt a quiet determination settling over her. Today had been a reminder of the obstacles she faced, but also of the strength she carried. And as the elevator doors opened, Amelia knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Amelia's hotel room was as pristine as it was luxurious. A large window stretched across one wall, offering a panoramic view of Denver's glittering skyline. The faint hum of traffic rose from the streets below, muffled by the thick glass. The room smelled faintly of fresh linen and lavender, a deliberate touch of calm in an otherwise bustling city. She set her suitcase beside the bed, her movements unhurried. The events of the day lingered in her mind, heavy and persistent, like a storm refusing to clear. As she kicked off her heels and eased into the plush armchair by the window, Amelia let out a slow, deep breath. The silence of the room was almost unnerving. Her phone buzzed on the side table, a reminder that the world was still moving around her, demanding her attention. But for now, she ignored it. She needed this moment to reflect, to process, to steady herself for what was to come. The notebook she'd written in during the flight rested on the table, the leather cover catching the faint light. Amelia reached for it, her fingers brushing against its smooth surface. She opened it to the page she'd filled earlier, her own words staring back at her. Change doesn't come from comfort. It comes from discomfort, from making people confront what they'd rather ignore. Her pen hovered over the page, hesitating. What more was there to say? She thought about the young woman at the baggage claim, her trembling voice, her wide eyes filled with admiration. That moment had been unexpected, but it had reminded Amelia of the importance of standing tall, even when it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on her. "Today wasn't just my fight," she wrote. "It was a fight for every person who has ever been made to feel invisible, for every person who has been silenced, dismissed, or overlooked. This isn't about me. It's about all of us. And the fight is far from over." She paused, tapping the pen lightly against the page. Her thoughts drifted back to the gate agent's sneer, the supervisor's dismissive tone, the whispers of passengers who assumed she didn't belong. Those moments had cut deeply, but they also fueled her resolve. Anger can consume you if you let it, but it can also be a tool, a spark that ignites change. The challenge is in using it wisely, in turning it into something constructive, something lasting. Her pen moved steadily now, the words flowing from her like water. There will always be people who doubt you, who judge you, who try to put you in a box that doesn't fit. But their limitations are not your truth. Your truth is in your strength, your voice, your unyielding determination to carve out a space where you can thrive. She closed the notebook gently, her thoughts quieter now. The day had been a battle, but it had also been a reminder of her resilience. As the night deepened, Amelia stood by the window, her reflection blending with the city lights. She thought of the speech she was scheduled to give at the conference, a speech about equity, about justice, about the power of using one's voice to create change. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd lived the essence of that speech today, not in a grand auditorium, but in the mundane setting of an airport gate. The weight of what she wanted to say felt heavier now. It wasn't just about theory or ideals. It was about lived experience, about the raw, unfiltered moments that define the fight for equality. Her words had to matter, not just to her audience, but to herself. The next morning, the hotel was alive with activity. Amelia moved through the bustling lobby with purpose, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She could feel the stares of other conference attendees, some curious, others admiring. She carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had seen her through the events at the airport, her head held high. When she reached the conference hall, a staff member greeted her with a wide smile. "Miss Hayes, it's an honor to have you here," the woman said warmly, extending a hand. "Thank you," Amelia replied, her voice steady but kind. She glanced at the stage at the far end of the room, its polished wood gleaming under the lights. This was where she would speak her truth, where her words would carry the weight of the battle she'd fought less than 24 hours ago. Backstage, Amelia took a moment to center herself. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and faintly floral perfume filling the air. When she opened them, she saw Eleanor standing a few feet away, watching her with a mix of pride and concern. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked softly. Amelia nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "I was born ready," she replied, her voice carrying the faintest hint of a smile. Eleanor stepped closer, placing a hand on Amelia's arm. "Go out there and show them what you're made of," she said. "Make them feel it." "I will," Amelia promised. As she stepped onto the stage, the applause was polite but subdued. The audience didn't know her yet, not really, but they would. Amelia stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on its edge. She scanned the room, taking in the sea of faces before her. When she began to speak, her voice was steady, each word deliberate. "Yesterday, I was reminded of a simple but profound truth. Change doesn't come from comfort. It comes from confrontation, from forcing people to see what they would rather ignore." The room fell silent, her words sinking into the air like stones into water. Amelia paused, letting the weight of the moment settle before she continued. "Today, I'm not here to talk at you. I'm here to talk with you about the realities we face, the battles we fight, and the power we all hold to create change, not just for ourselves, but for each other." The applause came slowly at first, then built steadily as her words resonated. And as Amelia spoke, she felt the weight of the previous day lifting, replaced by something far greater, purpose. The applause faded into a reverent hush as Amelia's voice carried through the vast conference hall. The stage lights illuminated her, casting a soft glow that contrasted sharply with the weight of her words. She stood tall, her posture steady, her presence commanding. Amelia took a moment to scan the room, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Some watched her with rapt attention, their expressions a mix of admiration and reflection. Others seemed unsettled, their brows furrowed, perhaps questioning their own assumptions. It wasn't discomfort she feared, it was apathy. But here, in this space, the tension in the air told her she had their attention. Her hands rested lightly on the podium as she continued. "Yesterday, I stood at an airport gate, holding a valid ticket for a first-class seat. But instead of being welcomed, I was questioned. Not because of the ticket, not because of the system, but because of the assumptions made about me before I even opened my mouth." The room remained silent, the weight of her words settling over the audience like a thick blanket. Amelia allowed the moment to stretch, her pause deliberate, drawing them further into her narrative. "I've had time to reflect on what that moment meant. It wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about the countless ways people like me are made to feel less than, to be told implicitly or explicitly that we don't belong, that no matter how hard we work, how much we achieve, someone will always find a reason to question our worth." A murmur rippled through the crowd, faint but perceptible. Amelia didn't falter. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone, drawing them closer. But here's the truth. They only succeed if we allow them to. If we stay silent, if we shrink ourselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for us, we hand them the power. And I, for one, refuse to do that. She straightened, her voice rising with conviction. Change doesn't happen in the comfort of silence. It happens in the discomfort of confrontation. It happens when we challenge the status quo, when we demand better, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. Her words seemed to pierce the stillness of the room. Faces shifted, expressions softening. A woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while a man to her left nodded slowly, his arms crossed over his chest. Amelia took a step back from the podium, letting her words settle. She didn't need to fill every moment with sound. Sometimes silence carried more power than any speech ever could. As the applause began again, hesitant at first but growing steadily, Amelia allowed herself a small smile. She stepped away from the podium, her heart still pounding. Eleanor was waiting in the wings, her expression a mix of pride and quiet determination. "That was incredible," Eleanor said, her voice low but fervent. "You had them hanging on every word." Amelia exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "It's not about me," she said softly. "It's about them, about planting the seed, even if I never see it grow." Eleanor smiled, her eyes glinting with approval. "You've done more than plant a seed, Amelia. You've started something." Backstage, Amelia was met with a wave of well-wishers, organizers, fellow speakers, even attendees who had rushed to offer their gratitude. Each handshake, each heartfelt thank you felt like a drop in a larger ocean, but she didn't bask in the accolades. Her focus remained on the broader picture, on the work still left to do. One encounter, however, stood out. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a worn leather briefcase approached her hesitantly. His suit was impeccable, but his demeanor was tentative, almost vulnerable. "Miss Hayes," he began, his voice low, "I wanted to thank you. Your speech. It hit close to home." Amelia tilted her head slightly, curious. "Thank you," she said, her tone inviting. "What resonated with you?" The man hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "My daughter," he said finally. She's been struggling. She's only 12, but she's already faced so much. The way you spoke about belonging, about fighting for your place. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I want her to know that it's okay to take up space, that she doesn't have to apologize for who she is." Amelia's heart softened. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, her voice steady. "She doesn't," she said firmly, "and neither do you. The best thing you can do for her is to show her, every day, that she's worthy. Not because of what she achieves, but because of who she is." The man nodded, his eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. That night, back in her hotel room, Amelia sat by the window, the city's lights stretching endlessly before her. She felt the weight of the day in her body, but her spirit was lighter. She opened her notebook once more, her pen poised above the blank page. "Today I spoke my truth, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it ripple outward. It's not enough to speak, though. It's not enough to inspire. Action is what sustains change, what gives it life." She paused, staring out at the skyline. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, she felt that the tide was shifting, slowly, imperceptibly, but shifting nonetheless. And with that thought, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to continue the fight. The next morning, sunlight streamed into Amelia's hotel room, casting golden patterns across the soft carpet. The city outside bustled with early activity, commuters hurrying along sidewalks, car horns blaring faintly in the distance. But inside, the room was still, a cocoon of quiet that Amelia welcomed. As she sat by the window with a cup of tea in hand, she stared out at the Denver skyline, her mind wandering back to the events of the previous day. Her speech, the conversations, the ripple effects of standing her ground at the airport. Each moment felt significant, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on her. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. Amelia reached for it, her brows furrowing as she saw a message from Eleanor. "You're making waves. Check the news." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She opened her laptop and quickly searched for her name. Headlines filled the screen, each one highlighting the story that had begun at the airport but had grown into something much larger. Traveler confronts discrimination at airport, sparks corporate accountability. Governor Eleanor Vance joins the fight for equity in public spaces. Amelia Hayes' story inspires national dialogue on systemic racism. The words felt surreal, almost distant, yet undeniably hers. Amelia leaned back in her chair, her gaze lingering on the headlines. The media had latched onto her story, amplifying it beyond what she could have imagined. But the attention wasn't what mattered to her. It was the opportunity to turn it into something meaningful. She closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The day ahead was packed with panels and discussions, each one another chance to make an impact. Amelia finished her tea, the warmth grounding her as she prepared to step into the spotlight once more. The conference hall was alive with energy when Amelia arrived. Attendees milled about, their badges swaying as they exchanged greetings and ideas. Amelia moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, nodding politely to those who recognized her. Her panel was scheduled for the late morning, and by the time she took her place on the stage, the room was nearly full. The moderator introduced her and the other panelists, their voices echoing slightly in the cavernous space. When it was Amelia's turn to speak, she rose from her seat and approached the podium. She began slowly, her voice steady but deliberate. Yesterday, I was reminded of something simple but profound. Change doesn't come from comfort. It comes from confrontation. It comes from forcing people to see what they'd rather ignore. The audience leaned in, their focus sharpening. Amelia let her words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. What happened to me at the airport wasn't unique. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a broader issue, a system that often fails to see the humanity in all of us. But the real issue isn't that these things happen. The real issue is how often they're allowed to go unchecked. Her voice rose slightly, infused with conviction. We've been conditioned to stay quiet, to avoid making waves, to accept less than we deserve. But silence doesn't protect us. It only enables those who benefit from the status quo. The only way to create change is to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. As Amelia continued, she saw the audience begin to shift. Some nodded in agreement, their faces alight with understanding. Others seemed introspective, their expressions softening as her words resonated. She shared her experience at the airport, not as a story of personal triumph, but as a call to action. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about creating a world where no one has to prove their worthiness to belong, where respect isn't conditional, and where everyone is seen for who they truly are. The room fell silent, her words cutting through the air like a blade. Amelia paused, her hands resting lightly on the podium. She could feel the weight of their attention, the collective understanding that this was more than a speech. It was a shared moment of reckoning. When she finished, the applause began slowly, almost hesitantly, before swelling into a wave of sound that filled the room. Amelia stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding. She hadn't planned to be here, to take on this fight so publicly, but now that she had, there was no turning back. As the session ended, attendees approached her with questions, gratitude, and their own stories of resilience. Each interaction felt significant, a reminder of the connections that could spark change. One conversation stood out. A young woman, her curly hair tied back in a messy bun, approached Amelia with hesitant steps. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Miss Hayes, I just wanted to thank you. I've faced things like what you described, and I never knew how to respond. Hearing you today, it gave me hope." Amelia's heart swelled. She placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder and said, "Hope is where it starts. But don't stop there. Let that hope drive you to action. Your voice matters, and I promise you, it's stronger than you think." That evening, Amelia returned to her hotel room, her body weary but her mind alight. She sat by the window once more, the city's lights stretching endlessly before her. The weight of the day settled over her, but it wasn't heavy, it was purposeful. She opened her notebook, flipping to a fresh page. Her pen moved slowly, each word deliberate. Today I saw what happens when people come together, when stories connect, when voices rise in unison. Change doesn't come overnight, but it comes. It starts in moments like these, in conversations, in questions, in the decision to say enough. She paused, staring out at the skyline. The fight wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But that didn't mean it wasn't worth fighting. Closing the notebook, Amelia leaned back in her chair. The road ahead was long, but she was ready to walk it, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or underestimated. Because change wasn't just a possibility, it was a promise, and Amelia Hayes intended to keep it. Her journey had begun with a moment of indignity, but it had transformed into a catalyst for change. Her voice had carried beyond the confines of the airport, reaching people who needed it most. In the end, the fight for justice wasn't about any single victory. It was about the collective power of many voices, all demanding better. And Amelia, with her strength, her grace, and her unwavering resolve, would continue to be one of those voices, inspiring others to join her along the way.